Another Level 2 Economics video. Today we're looking at analysing economic growth, economic concepts and models. So it's the 2.3 economic growth paper. Today we're going to look at paper 2020. So let's have a look down here. Question 1, causes of economic growth. So during 2020, countries of the United Kingdom left the European Union, allowing them to negotiate new trade agreements with other countries, including New Zealand. Referring to graph, then we've got the circular flow model. Then referring to the producers and household sectors in the circular flow model, fully explain how increased trade with markets in the United Kingdom will increase growth in New Zealand. So I've already written out a little bit of an answer here, but our strategy is going to be find the injection or withdrawal that's happening in the market. So what's the injection or withdrawal? And it's going to be more trade or new trade here with United Kingdom. So more trade with overseas. So overseas to producers, the increasing flow is going to be this highlighted green export receipts. So there's going to be more flows from overseas to producers because of the increased trade with the United Kingdom. Then link that to increased output. So as we sell more goods to overseas, so export more goods overseas, we need to increase output in New Zealand, or producers will increase their output. So increased output is where we want to talk about there. That's going to link to growth later on. And then we want to talk about 3 sectors and 3 flows just to be safe. So we've talked about overseas to producers, export receipts. You want to mention each flow by name. Then we want to say producers are going to need to purchase more resources in order to increase their output. So the income is going to rise as they purchase more resources. For example, they might purchase more labor from households, therefore they'll give them more wages in return, so that's income rising. Households' income will increase, so they'll be better off, income is rising, and then with that increased income, they're going to spend more at producers on goods and services. So that's going to be increase in export receipts, increase in income, increase in consumption. So 3 sectors, 3 flows. Name all the flows, name all the sectors explicitly, and then give an example of each one. And then the last part is we want to link it to increased growth. So we're going to say an increase in output or income represents increased economic growth. So we're saying output's rising because of the increased export receipts, or because of the increased consumption as well. Maybe those both add together to increased output. Then that means increase in real GDP, which is increase in growth. Or we could use the income method, which is to say more income for households represents economic growth. So part B, United Kingdom's departure from the European Union allows it to enter free trade agreements with New Zealand. The United Kingdom has many technology firms with highly efficient capital goods and production processes that at present are not sold in the New Zealand markets. New Zealand firms are likely to be created or expanded to sell in the United Kingdom market, or to take advantage of the imported technology. We need to think about the models. So the AD equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M, or our AS and components there, which are copy printer to remember. And so they might look like A decreasing. So I'm sorry, AD increasing. So we've put AD increasing because New Zealand is a big exporting country. So we're going to increase our net exports as we sell into the United Kingdom, where there's millions more customers. And then the second part is our AS increasing, and that comes from the highly efficient capital goods and production processes that we benefit from by New Zealand selling to those markets, or New Zealand importing from those markets. So we get the increased capital goods, which means we're more efficient. And in fact, we've got more technology, we can call that here. So we're going to highlight that technology model. And then for the C model, it's our net exports, our AD model, it's the net exports changing. Then we're going to use our 4 C's structure to answer the question. So the cause, we're going to use the context for the first sentence. Free trade means more trade. So because of the free trade agreement, New Zealand and the United Kingdom are going to trade more. Components, this causes an increase in export receipts. Then link the component to aggregate demand. For the curve, as X is a component of AD equals C plus X plus G minus M. This will increase AD and shift the curve to the right to AD1. We've not got our last C in there, which is our conclusion or a consequence, because we're going to do them both together as we have the Y to Y dash. AS shift, again, cause is going to come from the context, which is increased technology. Component, this increases productivity. Curve, this decreases cost of production, which will increase AS as firms can increase supply while maintaining profit margins, and shift the curve, the AS curve, let's call that, the AS curve to the right, to AS1. And then conclusion, both shifts combine to increase economic growth, resulting in a rise in real GDP from Y to Y dash. And C, which I found a pretty tricky question, if I'm honest, fully explain why the impact of growth from the shift of the aggregate demand curve might be greater than the impact from the shift in the aggregate supply curve, and your explanation refer to graph 1. So the answer here, and I've taken this from the extract or from the resource marking material, which is the UK has a very large number of potential customers they can sell to. So the impacts of the X will... so the impacts of the export receipts increasing will be large because we can sell to a lot more customers. Then a second reason is the impacts of the increase in X will flow into other sectors. So just referencing back to that circular flow model, saying that the flows will flow through the... Let's scroll up to it. The money will flow through the export receipts, and then the benefits will be multiplied as it flows into the market. And on the other hand, which is a good, since we've got to compare those shifts, we want to say on the other hand, only a portion of businesses will benefit from the increase in productivity, and it's likely to not be a huge percentage. The UK doesn't have huge technology, which is going to cause massive increases in productivity over many industries. That is more likely to be a bit smaller scale, and therefore it's a bit smaller. So a lesson that you can learn from this is it's not quite obvious actually what the answer is all the time. And so you need to justify what they have said is the larger shift. If they tell you something's the larger shift, then it is the larger shift, and it's your job to justify that. It's not to disagree with them. That wouldn't get you any extra marks disagreeing. Let's keep going. Question 2, PPF. So in PPF, we're thinking about what might shift the curve, or what might shift the point inside of the curve. We're thinking about limited resources or opportunity cost, and we might be thinking about choice, as well as capital and consumer goods. So on graph 2, may illustrate an increase in productive capacity. Label this new frontier BB. So we're saying increase in productive capacity, which means our curve, our production possibility curve, is shifting out. So A moves to B like this, and then obviously we can draw an arrow as well just to reinforce it's moving outwards like that. Then 2 changes. So the first change we're going to say is technology. So the changes come from these last 2 variables on the copy printer. So the TE for technology and the R for resources. So technology, and then when you want to expand on your answer, you're going to think technology is not going to be enough on its own. You definitely need to expand on that. You're going to say this is because. So a new technology means, or technology, this is because when new technology is released, more output can be produced with the same limited resources. So with the same amount of resources, we can increase our output. For example, AI allows workers to produce 10 times as many emails per day, or some sort of example in there. A specific one could be good. And then resources is the second one. So more output as there's more inputs. So in this case, if we talk about labor again, we might say there's an increase in population. So there's literally just more people available to work, and therefore there's going to be more output. And then the second part, which is compare and contrast real GDP and net social welfare as measurements of economic growth. Explain the strengths and weaknesses of real GDP compared to net social welfare as a measure of economic growth, and then why net social welfare might be better than real GDP. If we just look at this yellow box first, to compare and contrast, we need to use the bullet points. So we're going to follow those 2 bullet points. We need to use the words on the other hand, however, whereas, better off, worse off, to compare 2 things. We need to agree with the question. So if it says less than or larger than or better than worse than, we need to justify what they've asked us to justify. And then we need to refer to the resource material. So on the left-hand side here is my doc from the extract of the doc from my cheat sheet, which gives us some information about measures of economic growth. So we're comparing real GDP with net social welfare. So the description of real GDP is nominal GDP adjusted for inflation, shows if actual production has increased. Advantages, which is what we can state as the strengths, is objective, easy to compare over time and between countries. Disadvantages ignores what's produced. So, for example, a school and a prison are both worth the same. Income distribution is ignored, working conditions are ignored, unpaid work is ignored, the health of the population, infant mortality, pollution, any other factors or non-economic factors are ignored in real GDP. Compared with net social welfare, so it includes economic and non-economic factors, measures not just quantity of goods and services, but quality of life. Advantages is that it takes into account those non-economic factors, and it's more realistic representation of people and their happiness. The disadvantages can be difficult to measure, it can be subjective, and some arbitrary value choices are placed on the things measured. So it does have some drawbacks, again, difficult to compare with other countries, as well as countries measure different things at different times, and it becomes a bit objective of what's better. But locking this into your kitty with all of these definitions and some advantages and disadvantages is definitely going to pay off dividends when it comes to the exam. Question 3, but there's lots of congestion, environmental issues, and there's limited opportunities to grow. It's got a large value as $25 billion passes through, and when they hire 600 workers and thousands more indirectly. But they might consider a new port location. However, it's going to require lots of rail and road and other infrastructure, as well as lots of vacant land. So again, for excellence question like this, but it's only one question, we want to be saying following the bullet points and then referring to the resource material, as well as demonstrating our understanding of the impacts of economic growth. So in your answer, refer to 2 positive and 2 negative for households. So I'm going to scroll down to households here. Positives could be greater employment as businesses in the region expand, higher wages as the businesses compete for workers, bigger range of goods and services available as more firms are attracted to the region to service the increased population and number of businesses. And the last benefit might be greater infrastructure or greater number of public services as more people join the area. So those are possible advantages or strengths. For the disadvantages, higher rates or rents, and then higher property prices for those moving around. It's going to get more expensive to live there as demand increases. Congestion and pollution, use the extract because there's some good information in there. And then strain public services. So if the government doesn't expand quick enough or implement more public services, then the people might be worse off, like waiting for a doctor for a long time, for example. 2 positives and 2 negative impacts of the firm from the new port location. So here we go for businesses. A greater population growth will result in a larger market and greater demand for goods and services. New businesses, including those services that support export and import port delivery industry, so new customers for those businesses. And then cheaper land to build on. So obviously building in Auckland's quite expensive as the land is in high demand. So moving to a low demand area will allow them to build for cheaper. The negatives are going to be increased congestion for the businesses that are currently in the location, because we're going to get more traffic. Also increased pollution, and then maybe a difficulty getting skilled workers because the labour supply is so weak there. People haven't moved into the area yet. And then finally, the cost of moving and building new facilities could be quite expensive. The last part is the long-term benefits for the New Zealand economy from the movement of the port. And in this one, we want to talk about long-term benefits. The movement of the port will create a greater efficiency in the NZ economy by freeing up land and resources in the Auckland region for other uses. So if the port moves away, all of that land now becomes available for something else. And then the things that were on the land are still used. The port is still used somewhere else. And it creates regional growth, so taking some of the growth out of those high regions into those lower regions. And then in our answer, we want to not refer to just Northland. We want to talk about how the whole of New Zealand benefits from increases in real GDP. In this exam, students who got merits commonly explained the shifts in AS or AD, demonstrating depth or range in response. demonstrate understanding of reasons why the production possibility curve shifts, explain the weakness and the strength of measurements of economic growth, and explained in depth positive and negative impacts on either workers or firms. And then explained positive and negative impacts that did not contradict their previous answer. Candidates who were awarded excellence wrote full explanations of AS and AD, so that's our 4 Cs. Compared and contrasted key variables being examined, so bigger than, smaller than, greater than, less than. Reference both the appropriate model and stimuli material in the detailed explanations. So reference that context, talk about that graph. Explain the weakness and the strength of both measurements of economic growth. Explaining positive and negative impacts on both workers and firms in the new port location. If you'd like any more help with any other exams, please just leave me a comment or flick me an email, and you can leave a like on the video if you've made it this far. Cheers.